it's all fine to say that we need to find a moral voice who's able to, we're able to stand behind when interventions happen. But what do you say in response to people who bring up examples like Sierra Leone, for instance, where the British Army went into Sierra Leone and prevented the mass amputations that were happening as a result of the Civil War, and that this, regardless of the colonialism backdrop of the British, and in fact, a lot of people don't know this, but it was actually the Belgians that taught the practice of amputation. A lot of people assume that it was because Africans are savages, for instance, but it was actually the Belgian colonials who introduced that practice. But however, there was a lesser evil at place when the British Army came in and put a stop to those amputations. What do you say? Because Iraq is very easy now to condemn. How do we respond to those perhaps less obvious situations? And the calls, for instance, for going into Darfur, and the calls that came out from people like General Dallaire.
As you know, there's oil there. And I said, oh really? He goes, yes, there's oil there, which there is. And I think that's, I think it's very interesting that, you know, Darfur has become a cause célèbre among people who will not speak out about the Iraq War, who will not speak out about Palestine, who will not speak out about Afghanistan. This is not to say, this is not to negate or downplay the tremendous suffering that's going on there, but I think that the issue is being used very cynically for purposes that are not to the benefit of the people of Darfur or of the Sudan.
But again, to be provocative, was it a good thing then that nobody did anything in Rwanda?
I was going to say...
Based on our logic here today. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a challenge that who would set up any kind of, whose force would it be? And today under the UN, even a multilateral force going in defends the interests of the Security Council countries when it is approved to go in. That's the nature of it. In the specific case of Rwanda, I'm by no means have read on it, but it does appear quite clear that the UN force should have been bolstered at the particular moment of the massacres of the Hutu that was taking place, and that essentially Bill Clinton didn't care to do that and put the kibosh on that in that specific moment. But I do think we have to take the longer view on this, and I can't imagine a situation where I would want a European or a North American force going into Africa, for instance. And then again, when it's done under the UN, even when there's third world countries as part of the force, those forces commit terrible abuses as well.
And I think one of the long-term things that needs to be done to deal with these issues is to have perhaps the General Assembly making the final decision for intervention. I think there's a lot less chance that any sort of selfish, quasi-imperialist intervention would be approved if it wasn't left just to the Security Council.
What I think I heard from Peter and Derek, for instance, right now, is that there are certain conditions under which intervention, if we find the right mix and the right people from the West, can be positive and necessary. And what I think I heard from you is no intervention from the West under any circumstances.
It's a big if. That's what it is. We cannot trust the intentions of the people who want to intervene. It can't be sugar-coated. It can't be wrapped in different things. We have to protect the human being. But when the West, here we talk really Western intervention, becomes selective in that intervention, they lose my trust and they lose the trust of everybody. I mean, here it is. As recent as last January, poor besieged Palestinians were literally bombed to nothing, and they were killed, just because the United States and other Western Europes would not lift a finger. Not even a single journalist can go and observe. Even the UN was bombed there. So that's what it is. The intentions are not there. or I do not trust the intentions. If we are to intervene, yes, you may be intervening where there's a civil war going on. So we are separating between two parties. But we should not intervene there to tell people how to manage their affairs or to change a regime. The last time we did that, or one of the last times, look at Somalia. It's a basket case of violence and all these things. When, whether we like it or not, the extreme or the fundamentalist Muslims, Islamic movement, brought stability to Somalia. What did the West do? They sent the Ethiopians. And Somalia is back to the same endless game of violence. If we are to allow intervention, then it should be like what we have in courts. Usually a lawyer or a judge in court who has a vested interest, directly or indirectly, in the case, is expected to be pulled out, or expect him or herself to pull out, because has invested interest. A relative, a son, a daughter in a court case, whatever it is. So if we are to allow a decision to intervene, then the countries that have vested interest, who actually don't even are not shy of saying it. You know, Americans say, it's our national interest in Iraq. Then what about the national interest of the Iraqis themselves? So those people should not be there to decide about intervention or even participate in an intervention. Then I would trust it. Otherwise, no intervention is in my dictionary.
Thank you.
There's no perfect world, absolutely, and particularly in countries where there is no democracy. Looking at the Iraqi crisis and the Iraqi situation, Iraqis have never been an immigrant society. The Iraqis who you have encountered abroad, Iraqis like myself, who live abroad and settled for the rest of our lives, were mostly students who studied abroad. A lot of them married to men or women in the countries where they studied, or met another person in a third, like I met my wife, and of course in my situation there was a politics concerning my family. But the majority of Iraqis, in spite of all the harshness of the Saddam Hussein's regime, and I don't make any excuse of it, it was a very brutal regime, no doubt about it. Iraqis nevertheless have survived and have flourished, as long as they did not interfere in the politics of the regime. There was no democracy. So their rights, their health care, their education, freedom of movement, aside of politics, was there. Eventually, Iraqis, like others, would have learned from the West, would have the winds of freedom and democracy would have reached them. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe in the lifetime of my children, but eventually nothing will last forever. But here comes the war after Kuwaiti invasion and the brutal sanctions. And what we have raised, what the West has raised in Iraq, is an ignorant generation who is totally detached from the rest of the world, does not know what's or did not know what's happening in the world. All what they knew, there was a war, there was Saddam Hussein brutality, there was the Americans who came with a war. And that's what we see in Iraq now. All what they know is violence. Their education is deteriorated, their civil society almost doesn't exist. So, yes, it's a long term. And we in the West, unfortunately, don't have patience for long term. But we have to. Gandhi took so long with his peaceful movement to achieve freedom for India. And dictatorships will fall. Dictatorships of the Soviet Union fell without a war. And so is the Eastern countries. They did. So we need to give the people their space and give them or trust their intelligence that they will aspire and they will change. At high cost, but no thank you. They do not want, any nation does not want that change to come at the bottom of a foreign soldier.
Thank you.